Canada looks fine, that is the illusion. From the outside, it appears polite, stable, responsible. A country that avoided the worst of 2008. A country with universal health care. A country Americans point to and say, why can't we be more like that? But collapse does not always announce itself with fire. Sometimes it erodes quietly beneath your feet. Canada is not imploding like Argentina. It is not spiraling like Venezuela. There is no hyperinflation, no currency freefall, no government default. On paper, everything works. That is precisely why the danger is so hard to see, because the numbers look strong. GDP is rising, unemployment is relatively low, the government still functions, stores are open, paychecks still arrive, and yet half the country is living paycheck to paycheck. Housing is out of reach for an entire generation. Debt is the highest in the G7. Something does not add up. To understand what is happening, you have to look beneath the headline statistics and into the structure holding them up. Canada's growth story sounds impressive, but most of that growth is not productivity. It is population expansion and debt. When you add hundreds of thousands of new residents every year, GDP automatically rises. More people means more rent paid, more groceries bought, more economic activity recorded. But GDP per person, the number that actually measures whether individuals are getting richer, has barely moved. Canadians are not producing dramatically more value. There are simply more Canadians, and much of the spending driving the economy is borrowed from the future. Household debt sits around 180% of disposable income. For every dollar earned, households owe nearly two. That is the highest ratio in the G7. Debt fuels consumption. Consumption fuels GDP. GDP fuels political confidence, but debt must eventually be repaid. And when repayment meets rising interest rates, the illusion begins to crack. The first major fault line is housing. In cities like Vancouver, average home prices hover around levels that would have seemed impossible 2 decades ago. In Toronto, similar story. Even mid-sized cities have doubled in price within a decade. For young professionals earning solid incomes, ownership feels permanently out of reach. A combined 6-figure salary no longer guarantees entry into the market. The price-to-income ratios are far beyond what economists consider sustainable, yet housing has become the backbone of the economy. Construction, mortgages, renovations, real estate services, together they represent an enormous share of national output. Entire retirement plans are built on the assumption that property values will never fall. But asset bubbles do not require panic to burst, they only require gravity. If prices stagnate or decline, homeowners who stretch to buy will face renewals at higher interest rates. Monthly payments jump, savings vanish. Defaults rise, and because the economy is so deeply tied to housing, the shock would not remain contained. Banks tighten credit, construction slows, jobs disappear, all from a foundation people were told was safe. The second pressure point is demographic. Canada has pursued one of the most aggressive immigration policies in the developed world. The intention is clear: offset aging, support labor markets, drive growth. But growth without capacity creates strain. Housing supply has not kept pace with population inflows. Infrastructure expansion lags. Healthcare systems, already stretched, absorb more demand each year. The math becomes simple. More people, not enough homes. Prices rise. More patients, not enough doctors. Wait times grow. More students, not enough classrooms. Quality declines. Yet politically, immigration boosts GDP figures and helps mask stagnating productivity. When population grows faster than per-person wealth, averages can hide deterioration. At the same time, labor markets feel pressure. Wage growth struggles to keep pace with living costs. Young workers compete not just with technology, but with an expanding labor supply. The result is frustration, but rarely open debate. The third fracture is healthcare. Canada's universal model remains a point of national pride. But pride does not shorten wait times. Specialist appointments can take months, elective surgeries are delayed, emergency rooms overflow. The system still functions, but it functions under strain. An aging population intensifies demand. Baby boomers require more chronic care. Meanwhile, doctors and nurses report burnout. Some leave for better pay and lower taxes elsewhere. Others leave the profession entirely. Training replacements takes years. When supply cannot expand as fast as demand, rationing happens through time. It is not a dramatic collapse, it is a gradual thinning of quality. Those with resources increasingly seek private alternatives, quietly creating a two-tier reality that contradicts the national narrative. The fourth stress point is leverage. For years, rising home prices created a feeling of wealth. Home equity became collateral for lifestyle upgrades, renovations, vehicles, consumption. As long as prices rose, confidence followed, but wealth built on leverage is fragile. When interest rates rise, mortgage renewals reset higher. Households that were comfortable become squeezed, spending in other sectors slows, savings shrink. If unemployment rises even slightly, the margin of safety disappears. The entire system rests on households continuing to service record debt loads without interruption. That is not resilience, that is exposure. The fifth and least discussed issue is talent flow. Highly skilled professionals increasingly weigh their options globally. Doctors, engineers, software developers, in a world of mobility, they compare taxes, wages, housing affordability, and opportunity. If compensation is higher elsewhere and living costs lower relative to income, relocation becomes rational. When high earners leave, tax bases weaken, innovation slows, entrepreneurship declines. Meanwhile, the country continues importing labor to sustain population growth. If productive capacity leaves while structural burdens rise, long-term momentum erodes. None of these pressures alone guarantee collapse. What makes the situation dangerous is convergence, high household debt, elevated housing valuations, strained public services, aging demographics, productivity stagnation, individually manageable, collectively volatile. And because there is no single dramatic event, most citizens adapt rather than revolt. They cut discretionary spending, delay homeownership, accept longer waits, work more hours. The discomfort becomes normalized. But systems fail not when headlines scream, they fail when cumulative stress exceeds structural tolerance. If housing prices correct meaningfully, the ripple effects would spread quickly: reduced construction, falling consumer confidence, rising defaults. A recession would shrink tax revenues, deficits would expand, public services would face further constraint, immigration targets might become politically unsustainable in a downturn, social tension could intensify. And as uncertainty rises, those with mobility leave first. The quiet becomes loud. The bridge does not collapse the day the crack appears. It collapses the day the weight becomes too great. Canada still stands, the lights are on. The currency trades normally. Grocery stores are stocked, but beneath the surface, the economic model relies heavily on debt expansion, population growth, and ever-rising asset prices. If any of those pillars weaken simultaneously, adjustment will not be gentle. History shows that prolonged imbalances eventually resolve, either through reform or through rupture. The question is not whether Canada faces challenges. The question is whether those challenges are being addressed structurally or merely managed cosmetically. Because collapse is rarely an explosion, it is a sequence, a slow erosion of affordability, a quiet decline in service quality, a normalization of debt, a migration of talent, a widening gap between headline numbers and lived reality. And then one day the numbers change too. If this perspective challenged what you thought you knew, stay with the story. Because in the next chapter we break down exactly what would have to change to prevent this trajectory and what happens if nothing does. The surface may look calm, but foundations matter.